I'm going to cover pensions generally. This is a primer, kind of, and then we'll get into some real numbers. I mean, pensions weren't something that were a part of the Founding Fathers' plan for the Republic, or even available in the 19th century, or even into the early 20th century. This is a post-World War II phenomenon. And it came about largely because of negotiations in heavy industry, primarily the auto industry, in the 1940s, 1950s. Public sector pensions became common in the 1950s and 1960s. So we're moving up the ladder pretty close to where we are now. Traverse City had its first pension in 1946, and by charter we provided for the PA 345 pension for police and fire in 1970. Some definitions are probably in order, and the big difference in pensions are defined benefit versus defined contribution. People that are close to the pension system understand it, the public doesn't understand it as well. Defined benefit is the number of years of service. You work 25 years for an employer, times a final wage, and final wage is subject to different definitions under different contracts, plus a factor, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, and those three multiples give you a defined benefit pension. Defined contribution, on the other hand, means that the employer, sometimes paying 100%, sometimes paying less than that, with the employee contributing, makes a specific contribution into a pension fund, and that's it. That's the contribution that's made. It grows, whatever it grows to, the employee is entitled to at the end of a career from the amount that's been generated. It can be taken in a lump sum or in payments. One of the things that is little mentioned in the pension discussion is the fact that in this more mobile economy, as opposed to the economy most of us grew up in, there are actually some young professionals that prefer the defined contribution pension because they're moving. They're working for one employer for 2 years, another employer for 3 years, another employer for 5 years. Under the old defined benefit system, they would never vest. So these are people that find that this is a better pension for the lifestyle and employment career that they've adopted. The landscape changed in the 1980s and 1990s. People were starting to understand that defined benefit pensions could be defined as a promise that's made without the assurance that there's going to be money to support it. The private sector understood this and began the change to defined contribution pensions, to the point that now 80 to 85% of private employers have defined contribution pensions as opposed to defined benefits. The public sector hasn't been able to move. A combination of law, constitution, resistance by the bargaining units, and so the public sector, we're the public sector, continues to have over 80% of its employees in defined benefit pension plans. Michigan in 1997 was rather unique. We were one of the first 2 states that, as a state plan, went to a defined contribution pension program. Michigan and Alaska were the first 2 states. I believe Nebraska has now joined the ranks, but other state plans, distinguishing that from local plans, 47 states continue to have some form of defined benefit pension program. And that's why we're seeing less discussion of pension problems in Michigan by comparison as we are in other states. I mean, in other states, this is a front page headline every day. And then we're talking New Jersey, we're talking Rhode Island, we're talking Illinois, we're talking California. They're states that are having a terrible time coming to grips with the promises that have been made. Interestingly, Grand Traverse was one of a handful of counties also in the 1990s, I think it was 1997, that went to a defined contribution pension program. That was pretty advanced thinking on the part of then County Administrator Childs and the County Board of Commissioners at that time. Oakland County has done the same, and Oakland County, as a result, has had less financial problems than many of the other counties in the state. Grand Traverse County is reaching a bulge in its premium assessment by MERS that always happens when you switch from a defined benefit program. We're going to talk more about that underwriting glitch or problem later on. Parenthetically, I've noticed that a recent study showed that the state of Michigan has probably saved $2.3 to $4.3 billion in the 14 years since adoption of a defined contribution pension program. Well, what's happened in Traverse City? Well, in 2009, the Cofat Report was issued, and you'll recall that 26 citizens participated for a year and a half, prepared a 100-page report to this body, and we unanimously supported a switch to defined contribution pensions. We made the recommendation in February of 2009 when we presented our report to the Commission. Well, MERS came in April of 2009, and here's the problem. They said, well, our underwriting standards are such that if you abandon your defined benefit program and go to a defined contribution program, we will condense your payments. Our underwriters will treat you as less creditworthy, and so instead of spreading your payments out over 27 years, they'll have to be made in 14 years. And we were aghast. I mean, you mean to tell us that it's going to cost us more money to try to be frugal? And the answer from MERS is yes. But we have negotiated some lower factors for new hires. We've gone from 2.5 to 2.0 for public safety. We've gone to 1.5 for MERS members. What do those numbers mean? Remember the three-part multiple, number of years times final wage times a factor. So if you go from 2.5 to 1.5, that is going to be a significant savings. But it's a savings on future pensions. And that doesn't come to grips with the problem that we're about to see. Next is something that I was curious about, and I went to a friend of mine who's in the financial business and said, what's the dollar value of a pension for somebody who retires at 65 and gets $1,500 a month, male and female, or if they get $2,000 a month. Now remember, most public employees tend to retire before the age of 65. Just say they retire at 65. If I had to go and fund that, what would it cost me or my employer or anybody else? And you can see that the numbers are appreciable. They're all over $250,000. So when you retire with a $1,500 a month pension, let's say as a female at age 65, if you were to do that yourself, the cost would be $273,000. Okay, so we're not talking about minor amounts of money. We transpose this to the Traverse City annual budget. Okay, and I've rounded some of these. Thank you, Ben. I've rounded some of these figures off. Roughly $13 million is our budget. Okay, right now the pension contributions that we pay are $1.6 million for the MERS premium contribution, premium, whatever you want to call it. $1.3 million for the PA 345. So that means that we're paying roughly $2.9 million a year out of our budget for pensions. Now that's to pay the premium requested by MERS and the PA 345 board. Now we went to the most recent reports, and these are as of January 1, 2010, because we don't get them until June or January 1, 2011, we don't get them until June of this year, so they're relatively new. Our unfunded liability in MERS is $14,900,000. Our unfunded liability for the PA 345 is $11,300,000. But here's the one that the mayor really called to our attention a few years ago. What have our premiums gone up in the last 10 years? Okay, 2001, PA 345, we paid $276,000, a little over $250,000. 2010, 10 years later, $1.346 million. That's in 10 years. That's just PA 345. MERS, in 2001, former city manager Lewis was asked to contribute $696,000 toward the MERS pension fund. City Manager Bifus in 2010 was asked to contribute $1.5 million. So basically, you take the total pension increase between 2001 and 2010. We're not talking about ancient dates now. This is pretty fresh. We have gone from $972,000 in pension contribution to $2.9 million in pension contribution. As I'll point out later, that's not enough to meet our liabilities. But that means that this city manager, when he has to prepare a budget for us, has roughly $2 million less to spend than your predecessor 10 years ago. Got to provide all the same services. We have to provide police, we have to provide fire, we have to do public services, but he's got less money to spend. The dollar increase is just shy of $2 million. The percentage increase in 10 years, 299%. I really wanted to make it 300%, but half didn't do it. What are the current Traverse City numbers? We have 150 current employees plus 42 latent power. We have 151 currently drawing MERS pensions. We have 55 drawing police or fire pensions. We have 87 employees vested. That means they're in the system. We're going to pay them. They're not yet on pension. And here again, the unfunded liability, MERS, nearly $15 million. Police and fire, $11.3 million. Total unfunded liability, $26,200,000. Now that's based on market as of January 1, 2010. As we'll be explaining later, we have to be making enough money on that, and we're not. So what does unfunded liability mean? I mean, it's not enough to just say here, we owe this much money. How is that defined? That's the number of dollars that we need to keep our current promises to our currently vested employees and our currently receiving employees. Are our calculations accurate? I think they're probably low. Now, in all fairness, city engineer was here, he's pointed this out, Ben has pointed it out. Some of the pension funds are assuming in their calculations that there's going to be pay increases of 4.5% annually, as well as calculating too high on their investment money, okay? There ain't going to be 4.5% increases to employees. You know it, I know it, the employees know it. So that would tend to drag the unfunded liability downward. But at the same time, the funds are anticipating, the MERS fund and the PA 345 funds are anticipating that we make 8%, okay? That isn't going to happen, as we'll discuss later. How do they calculate unfunded liabilities? Most plans use 8%. There's some still using 8.5%. I believe CalSTRS, which is the California system, is down to 7.5%. There is a huge nationwide outcry that this is doing nothing more than burying the problem. This isn't enough, okay? Well, this decade, there's been 1 year between 2001 and the present where earnings on the corpus of a pension fund would exceed 8%. So for every year that it's under, you've got to double it to go up. Footnote on this one, in my reading, Bill Gates, who is socially one of the most liberal guys around, has called the 8% presumption an accounting gimmick. Now, I've calculated based on what the pension funds are using, which is an 8%. That gives us the 26 million plus in unpaid liabilities. PBS had a website where you could run over the different states and figure if they say it's 8%, here's what it would be at 5.2%, here's what it would be at 4.3%. So if you happen to believe that 4.3% is a more likely result of the pension fund's investment than 8%, then the 79% funded program drops down to 50%. If I don't make any other point today, I want you to understand what this unfunded liability is. This is a bill for services we've already received. This isn't something that we got to pay for next year's policeman, fireman, DPW worker. We are paying for a workforce that worked between 1984 and 2010. We haven't paid them yet. Now, if you happen to think that you ought to be paying your employees every year as they work, that's a crazy situation. Oh, and the reason I had to use this calculation from PBS is that MERS wouldn't calculate it for us because we're not 80% funded. If we're not 80% funded, they decline to help us with the numbers. It's very cooperative on it. Okay? There's a couple other things coming down the pipe that you should be aware of. One are changes in GASB, Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Okay? There's some amendments to the way that public funding is supposed to be reported on balance sheets. It's pending right now. And horror of horrors is going to insist that we report what our unfunded liabilities are. I mean, there are people running around like Chicken Little saying, "Oh, this is a terrible thing. We can't let people know how deep they are in the hole." But I have an article from the Governing Magazine, which is a publication that we all get as members of the City Commission, probably other governing bodies do, talking about the new accounting rules for public pensions and the extent to which they're going to have to be revealed. Now, just last week I stumbled across a blog in which an accountant from California who is involved with this for some of the counties out there is responding to the criticisms of these changes. Because people are afraid that this is going to panic everybody. I kind of hope it does, to be honest. But, and this accountant said that the most important thing related to the reforms isn't what the liability is. These proposals have nothing to do with how we choose to fund our pension benefits. The important thing is that the reporting is accurate, both in terms of when it happens and in terms of detail. It's purely a transparency issue. By spreading the pension expenses that cause unfunded pension debt over 30 years and reporting them as a generic pension expense, government officials don't get the bad news fast enough to do something before the debt gets worse. They don't get specific information to point them at what's wrong and what needs to be fixed. There's nothing political about that. It's called good financial management. One of the best summaries that I've seen. GASB isn't designed to work for or against anybody. It's designed to be transparent. Fault. Okay, and I think there are people that expect me to come here tonight and say there's a bunch of bad guys out there. There are bad negotiators, there's bad unions, there's bad employees, there's bad city managers. That's not the case. We all made mistakes. If there's fault in that regard, I got to plead guilty. 42 years ago, I served on the Bay County Board of Commissioners, and I was on the committee that granted the first public pensions to Bay County employees. So I'm in there with the rest of them. We just simply didn't understand the liabilities that we were posing for our communities. And it's taken a long time for it to come, to come to fruition. Now, while I'm not here to point fingers of blame at anybody for where we are, I think all of us would deserve some opprobrium if we don't recognize the problem and fix it. And that's where we're going to end up tonight, is talking about possible solutions. Costa Mesa, California. A consultant came in and said that the city's unfunded liability will keep growing if the city continues to pay just its annual minimum and the pension fund doesn't see a much higher return on investments. The consultant recommended the city council reduce the city's payroll, start paying off debt with extra cash, get employees to start paying more toward their pensions, implement a second-tier retirement system for new hires, and ask current employees to pay more into their pensions. Do we want to pay the pensions that we promised? My answer is yes. We made the promises. I think we got to pay them. But I don't think that we can pretend that this system can keep on going. The hole can't get any deeper. This is like having a credit card where you're paying $25 minimum charge on your balance as your wife is going out and kicking up the charges every week and saying, hey, credit, nobody's coming after me. I haven't been sued. I haven't heard from the credit card company. They're happy to get my $25 every month. Meantime, your balance is going up. That's what's happening to us. And that's the problem that we have to address. One of the problems in Michigan that has kept the public sector from responding with the speed that it should have, the speed that the private sector has responded, is we have a constitutional constraint, Article 9, Section 24 of the 1963 Constitution that says this is that wages and pensions are a matter of contract and to be protected, and we can't change them. Do we repeal that guarantee? I don't know. I don't think we get it through the voters. But that is one of the possible problems. They talk about accrued benefits. Now there's a play in the Constitution. There's one of the places where we can maybe play with some good legal assistance on the issue. You know, maybe we can say, you've been an employee for 22 years, you've got a defined benefit pension for the first 22 years, now we're going to add the last 8 years of your pension career with a defined contribution pension. Probably be challenged in court, but maybe that's what ought to be done. The thing that we've all got to think about is what I call the moral and generational fairness issue. At my age, I ought to be home watching TV tonight and not worrying about these 20 and 30 and 40-year-old kids that are going to be paying my bills for me, because that's what's happening. Understand that's what's going to happen. We tell somebody they're going to move into a house in Traverse City, we're going to tell them, you, your wife, and 2 kids, yeah, it's about 10 grand you owe. So it's like a special assessment, except we don't put it on the books like we would for a sewer. Because we've gotten $10,000 worth of work out of our employees between 1984 and 2011, and you're going to pay it. That's a real sales pitch for community, isn't it? Okay, here's some of the solutions that have been tried. I've got a few on the list here, and I've got a lot more to read to you. Down in Huntington Woods, recall that was the first community that had a Cofat committee. And they came up with a solution that I don't quite understand. They said, yep, we got to pay off all this unfunded liability. It's umpteen $1 million, and they voted themselves a bond issue to pay it off. But they haven't corrected the problem, and now they got a big bill for the bonds that they're paying at interest. Hopefully it's at low interest. Pritchard, Alabama tried to declare bankruptcy. Court said, no, you can't. We don't have any money. So basically, if an employee that has a $1,000 a month pension in Pritchard, the city happens to have $250 available to him at the end of the month, that's what he gets. Wouldn't let him declare bankruptcy, so they get what they have. Other solutions including lengthening of vesting times. Vesting means at a certain point you're entitled to your pension come hell or high water. You know, a lot of places it's 8 years. Maybe if you move it out to 10, move it out to 12. Raise the ages of retirement. I think Ben has done a little bit of that work in the negotiations so far, and I'm assuming he'll be doing more in the future. Multiple California cities have increased employee contributions, but even there, they're just scratching the surface. New Jersey has gone to calculating the final wage, the other factor in the 3-point multiplication. And they average the whole career. They'll average when you started working for $5,000, when you ended work making $45,000, whatever that average is would be the amount that's used in your multiple. And they've eliminated any factoring in of overtime. So if your salary is $30,000 a year, if you happen to make 35 because you got some overtime, that isn't going to be calculated into your pension amount. Start thinking about the alternatives. And I guess that goes to why I'm here tonight. I think the public has to understand the issue. I think it's important for the new candidates to understand the issue. If it doesn't convince you to go and withdraw your candidacy tomorrow morning. I think the city commission, the management of the city has to understand the issue. But the most important thing is the public. You can't go to the public and say, all's well with the world, that don't change anything. Okay? The public has to understand this, because the public, how much public do we have here today? 3 candidates and for other people. We do better than that if we talked about the train or the Wharton Center or how much beach space there should be for boats. The public doesn't want to hear about this. They can't believe that there's a problem. But if we do nothing, every year Ben's going to have less money to spend. And eventually, you know, after I'm sitting out at Birchwood Nursing Home, we'll run out of money and somebody else will have to tell the public about it. We can make an immediate switch to defined contribution for all employees. It's kind of my personal view, but it would be a big upturn. Remember what I told you what MERS said? Well, Mike, whatever you owed, we spread it over 27 years, now you got to pay it over 14 years. That's a tough one to swallow. We're going to have to maybe accelerate our reduction in services. Is reduction in services all you're going to have? Okay? You're not going to have any increase in services. Don't let people come to you and say, hey, I got a new idea for good stuff for Traverse City. There isn't going to be money for it. Under the category of C, negotiate smaller multiples. The manager has started that. Maybe we could close groups individually, go to defined contribution a group at a time, maybe swallow the increased premium or contribution for that group. That's a possibility. I've explained to you the MERS position on a closed group. The gradual service reduction is going to happen. D, voluntary premiums. This one's fun. See, MERS are among the pension Pollyannas. Everything's going to be fine. You know, back in the 1980s, the pension fund made a lot of money, so someday it's going to make a lot of money again. Okay. But this year, they sent us our financial report with an interesting footnote in it. Footnote was that, well, you know, things haven't gone quite that well, and this is your assessment, but if you want to make some voluntary premiums, you know, we would encourage you to do that, which is basically tacit admission. There's not going to be enough money in the kitty to pay for the retirement. E, we'll talk about others. And let's say some of these were echoed in possible recommendations created by Treasurer Tweetmeyer. Increase the retirement age, lengthen the number of years over which final average compensation is calculated. That the longer you stretch it, the more it tends to average down. Okay. Believe it or not, according to Michaela at the MERS conference this year, they proposed shortening the final year of payments to 3 years, which would tend to increase your final pension. You can maybe limit what's included in the calculation of compensation, maybe no overtime. That brings me to another point. Our unions have been pretty responsible here as compared with other places like New Jersey, where we have not encountered spiking. And I think I talked to Ed about a year or so ago, and he hasn't encountered this either. Spiking means that members of a bargaining unit will decline overtime when they know that Joe is on the verge of retirement. So a $50,000 a year guy will all of a sudden get $50,000 in overtime because he's the only one accepting it. And so then his pension is based on his $100,000 wage. Okay, clearly an abuse, but it happens. It hasn't happened here. That's a credit to our employees. Other suggestion, employee contributions and maybe setting a maximum retirement benefit level. Here's some of the things that have happened around the country, and I'm going to go in no particular order, but I think you have to have an idea of how people are trying to grasp this problem. Nevada has lower pensions for post-January 1, 2010 hires. 12 states, including Iowa, Nebraska, New Mexico, have increased employee contributions. 14% of Michigan municipalities have already increased or created employee contributions toward pension. Vallejo, California, they're trying to bankruptcy. They're one of 15 cities, by the way. I mentioned Pritchard, but that was just the first one. 15 cities in this country are trying to declare bankruptcy. The most recent one you'll really love, the capital of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, is trying to declare bankruptcy. The San Diego city attorney has filed a suit to have current employees pay half of the unfunded liability out of their assessments and half of the current assessments for their future pensions. San Diego is a city that's in deep trouble, as is San Francisco. Illinois And let me back up. We've always paid our bill. We've always paid our assessments. And most municipalities in Michigan have. Some states have not. Illinois, to balance its budget, just didn't pay into the pension fund for its employees for a couple of years. The hole is incredible. They've now had to issue bonds. It doesn't get any more public service for the public, but it's $7.2 billion in bonds have been issued over the last 2 years to cover pension liabilities in Illinois. Mayor Bloomberg in New York, he wants the vesting to go there from 5 to 10 years. Interestingly, in August of this year, Ann Arbor, which is, the birthday of Michigan, they are moving toward longer vesting periods. Mayor Bloomberg, back to his proposal, no pension checks at all until you're age 65. Maybe you retire at 62, but you get your pension starting when you're 65, plus higher employee contributions. Governor Cuomo, New York, wants 12 years vesting and no spiking. They do have a spiking problem there. As I mentioned earlier, Bill Gates referred to the 8% assumption as an accounting gimmick that will hurt education in the long run. He's concerned about the impact of reduced revenues for education. And he was also very early to talk about the problems with OPEB that are coming up. Speaking of education, I was at a presentation by Paul Soma, the financial director for the school district. Some interesting numbers. Retiree cost per student, the Traverse City School District, 2008-2009, not too long ago, $822 per student, just for retiree, not for instructions, not for any kind of support, just for pension. But you think that's bad? 3 years later, 2011-2012, his budget has $1,238, another 50% increase per student just for retirement benefits. As he pointed out to the group that he was speaking to, if the state sent the same dollars every year, we still have less dollars for education every year. Not a partisan issue. I mentioned Bloomberg, I mentioned Cuomo, Rahm Emanuel, Duval Patrick, Jerry Brown. Oh, by the way, Ed Rice would be happy to know Jerry Brown, the governor of California, is very much opposed to the concept of buying time. And I think you're all familiar with that, where somebody comes in and says, I'm going to buy time. Well, if you've got and we've stopped it here in the city, the Light and Power has stopped it, but it's a practice where somebody says, well, I'll pay you $14,000 and I'll get 3 more years of pension benefits, and that pays for it. No, it doesn't. The National League of Cities this summer did a survey. 80% of municipal finance officers list pensions as a significant budget problem. The Pentagon, August of this year, proposes switching the military to 401ks from a defined benefit pension. The post offices are trying to withdraw from the Federal Pension and Health Fund. Joseph Rao, who's a Northwestern University economist, says that borrowing problems are like drinking problems. The first step is to address the problem and acknowledge it. Okay, what do we do next? In other words, we're paying over 20% of our budget toward pensions right now. And we're falling farther and farther behind. We've got a $26 million debt for services already rendered. And how do we still provide services to our taxpayers? And go through the list. More multiple vesting years, retirement age deferred, eliminate health care, which is going to happen, there's no question about that. Do we do like Huntington Woods, put a $30 million bond issue on the ballot and tell our people, face up to the debt and help us pay our bonds, add it to your taxes? Do we make voluntary premium add-ons? Do we increase our employee contributions? Do we close defined benefit units? Or do we do nothing and pray for the stock market? I do hope you understand the illustration that accompanies that last yes. I'm here because the manager's going to need your support in the spring. It is not business as usual. And if we were to be so irresponsible as to say, we need to do everything we've always done, and more because people are asking for it, that would be irresponsible. I don't know what the solution is. I'm not casting blame on the past, but I'll cast blame on myself and all the rest of us if we don't do something to address it. And I urge you to go out and when you talk to people, don't be the Pollyannas. Don't say everything's going to be fine. There's only a handful of green eye shade people up at the city commission that want to solve this problem. It's not that. This is a problem that could have impact on this city's survival in the future. And consider what economist Lawrence Kotlikoff at Boston University referred to as fiscal child abuse. When you say, if I postpone it this year, my kids will pay the bill 10 or 15 years from now. I don't think that's the right thing to do.